So just kind of moving in the segment, I want to have you unpack a little bit more about the family dynamics, and maybe this is where we tie in a little bit more closely to the theme of against all odds. And I know when we spoke initially, that seemed to kind of resonate with this part of the story. Can you just kind of open that up for us and share how the that kind of adversity and I don't know if friction's too strong of a word, but how that weaves into this part of the story.
Sure. And this has been a journey that I've been on for the last probably 2 years now
Okay.
of being vulnerable, being open to, talking about failure. And unfortunately, I think within the real estate business, it's endemic that we have this hero culture of talking about how great we are, and the deals we do, um, and the success, where nobody really wants to talk about the failure.
Hmm.
So for me, the company, once we started raising capital deal by deal, the company started scaling really quickly. And we got very focused on acquiring opportunities and doing deals. And one of the biggest mistakes I made in my career was not spending enough time, energy, or resources on everything else, infrastructure wise, that has to go into the business that's really unassociated with the deals themselves, right?
Hmm.
So I think one of the big mistakes I made, and I see a lot of other entrepreneurs and aspiring sponsors make, is they just want to be real estate guys.
Hmm.
Whereas the reality is, if you want a real estate company that is scalable and repeatable and is an actual business on itself, you need to have investor relations, reporting, marketing, HR, tax, audit, all of these things that really don't have anything to do with buying an apartment building or an office building, but they're just as, if not more, vitally important to running the business itself.
Hmm.
And so what I found myself was, at a certain point, we had grown really quickly, really fast, and we were constantly just putting out fires because we had focused on making these acquisitions that were doing fine, but everything else was really lackluster
Hmm.
that supported those real estate acquisitions. And so that was about a year of getting my teeth kicked in by investors, by mentors, by anyone you can imagine. It was a very difficult time. And I went through, Brene Brown talks about this. Like, I went through all those really hard conversations in the meeting rooms in person where it was not fun.
Hmm.
And I went through those periods of time where the only way you can grow is by just embracing that painful moment and being fully open and vulnerable to all the criticism being sent your way. And would I want to do it again? No. Do I wish it hadn't happened? Of course. Do I think it made me a better manager and a better entrepreneur ultimately? 100%. And I'm glad it happened early in my career. Do I still make mistakes? Of course, we all do. But I'm very much more thoughtful and methodical about how to grow the business efficiently and not let the deals dictate the fact that you're running what is essentially a small business. And people have to realize, in America, small businesses fail. I
Hmm.
mean, the numbers are not strong, right? So
Yeah.
to the extent you can take all that risk off the table and just kind of, once you put the infrastructure and the time and the energy in place, then you can really grow considerably. But unless you have that kind of effort on the front end, I think it's going to be really challenging. And so, talking about working through adversity, um, most of my investors, looking back on it, they were frustrated, but they were trying to teach me a hard lesson.
Okay.
And, you know, I would encourage people going through that period of time. One, they could always reach out to me and I can talk about it with them. But two, you have to understand that ultimately, on the other side of it, it will make you a better person.
Hmm. So is it, and I want to draw maybe some broad parallels here. Is what you're describing sort of like, okay, we've got this new company or new venture. We've got to get sales, right? So that's got to be like first layer, but then we have to have ops to support that. I guess as you were talking, I was kind of seeing like okay, you got the surface layer activities, which have to happen, right? Which are tied directly to the deal or very intimately, but you also have this foundation of just the mechanics of what have to go on behind the scenes and coordinating resources and things like that. Is that kind of a fair way to summarize that?
Yeah, I think the way that I usually put it with aspiring entrepreneurs within the real estate space is, okay, you want to go buy a property or you want to raise a fund. That's great. But before you do that, you need to have all these conditional precedents taken care of. And so, because, and it's really hard to tell an entrepreneur, a young one who is just, you know, chomping at the bit to go out and take over the world. But if you don't take care of all these seemingly mundane things on the front end, it's going to slow your growth and progress. Because imagine if you don't have a proper reporting system in place and you go out and you raise a couple $1 million and you have 50 investors. Imagine every phone call that you have to take during the week from all those investors that you have to handle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that just takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And in this business, time kills deals. And the one commodity that you don't have control over is the amount of time that you spend on things. So
Mm-hmm.
it's hard, and it doesn't seem like it's very, you know, it's not, certainly not the sexiest part of the business.
Sure.
But if you want to grow a really legitimate enterprise, these are all the things you need to take care of on the front end.
Do you like in the commercial real estate space, would you say that when you say front end, is that like day one, or is there like, hey, we need to get some things going and there's a early milestone?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a good question. And it's very challenging because obviously it's easy for me to say because I've got enough fee generation to pay for all these mouths to be fed and the overhead. When you're
Mm,
just starting out, liquidity is a real problem. And the reason you're raising capital from other people is because you don't have it yourself, which I totally understand. So the answer is try your best, get products on the marketplace that maybe are best in class, but will get the job done for now.
mm,
But the key is to be as open and transparent and communicative with your investors as you possibly can and
mm,
set their expectations early and say, listen, that's great. You want to invest with me. I don't have enough money today to pay for Juniper Square for investor relations portal, but I can pay for this one. And it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but it will take care of kind of the the meat of the issue, and it will give you what you need for today. And I
mm,
aspire to, in the next 1, 2, 3 years, improve to a Juniper Square type functionality.
mm,
And I think as long as you're very transparent with your investors, no one's going to begrudge you that if you set those expectations. But if you don't, and you say, yeah, we're going to have world class reporting, institutional quality reporting, and you don't, that's when you get into trouble. Because I don't think investors will begrudge you that if they realize he's just starting out. I understand. But if you don't bring it up, which some people are really afraid of because they just want to close the deal and convert the investor, but I promise you, you're going to save yourself a lot of heartburn and brain damage if you're just upfront and transparent about what you can or can't do and what those expectations are for the investors.
yeah, that's awesome, and I think that translates to a number of markets and industries and positions. And I think just in general, and tying this a little bit back to the against all odds theme, you, excuse me, you are going to have the most success when you have these odds against you, when you're in the face of adversity. And I'm just trying to like summarize some of what you were saying by being clear. You're going to have stakeholders, whether it's investors or a boss or fellow, team members or something like that. There's going to be other stakeholders in this endeavor that you're moving forward with. Being clear, setting expectations, and having a path, having some kind of projection or vision or plan goes a long way to for those stakeholders to understand where they are coming into, where they're meeting you in this journey, and what the capabilities are. So I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's a great way to kind of bring that back to the theme and something that resonates with me. If I, as you know, as you're talking, as I look back on my career, where I'm at now, where I want to be, and the things that I've experienced, that if I had just been more clear with my boss or my customer or something like that, and because when you're not, that other person or people or entity, they're going to make assumptions about what you're capable of, or what you're selling, or what what the discussion at hand is. And I think that's where some of the disconnect can certainly come in.
Yeah, I can promise you, and I can tell you from personal experience, that if you don't provide excellent communications and reporting structures, and you leave your investors, your stakeholders, your shareholders in the dark, they will fill that void with their worst nightmares,
Mm-hmm.
with their worst assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
because that's just human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And they will not begrudge you poor performance or a deal gone bad, because that's kind of what they signed up for, right? I mean, this is the business we're in. But if you don't tell them anything, that's when things get really scary. And that is something that can ruin your career long term. I don't think anybody begrudges a failed entrepreneur, especially in America. And you
Mm-hmm.
can see that oftentimes successful entrepreneurs have 2 or 3 early missteps, right? That's how they get the knowledge, that's how they get the experience, that's how they get the scar tissue,
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the investors will keep coming back if you've been communicative and transparent and clear. But if you're not, that's when things can get really, really dark.
Mm-hmm.
So avoid that at all costs.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that. So within this time frame, last few years, it sounds like you guys have experienced, quite a bit of growth on the team, and at the same time, you're kind of, sounds like you've been going through this part of leading the team, and really challenging yourself to make sure that you're setting the company up for success. Is there anything else related to that you think is relevant, or wanted to share?
Yeah, I think with technological advances today, what would have been really expensive or almost impossible when I got into the business 10 years ago is now really accessible and affordable, right? So, automation and digital platforms can really make your life a lot easier. And
Mm,
also, it's just what your investors are going to expect. So, I don't think there's any reason nowadays not to have all of that kind of all the bells and whistles, frankly.
mm-hmm.
Um, so that's kind of I would leave the conversation with is that. And also you have to realize that at some point, the hero's journey has 3 chapters. There's the sense of adventure, and you go off and you conquer the world. Then there's the failure, there's the dark period, and then there's the third chapter, which is kind of the rebirth.
Mm,
And the extent of how bad the second chapter is, how good the third chapter is going to change for every person. But it is the natural cycle of things. So to the extent that when you're living in that moment, you can embrace that experience, it's part of the journey you're signing up for.
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I want to pivot into kind of a third segment here. You mentioned in opening up that you played lacrosse in college, which is awesome. Um, and you mentioned that you're still involved to some extent as a bit of a mentor of sorts. Can you just kind of share what that looks like?
Sure. So I played at a Division 3 liberal arts school, and my brother played there as well. It was a ton of fun, great experience, a lot of good friends. And I had a teammate of ours passed away suddenly in September,
Hmm.
not of COVID, but very suddenly. And it made me realize that experience was a bigger part of my life than maybe I had realized, and I'd taken it for granted. And there were people in my life who I would consider really good friends, but I hadn't talked to them in 10 or 15 years. And I didn't want the next time that I spoke with them to be at another funeral or a wake or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I reconnected with a lot of college friends, colleagues, classmates, teammates, and through that process got involved with my college. And I do a podcast where I have a student athlete alum come on the show, and we talk about their experience being an athlete at school. We talk about their transition into professional life, and um, then it transitions to more of an informational interview. Hey, what does your day to look like? What is your profession? If people are interested in this, what's the right way that they could get into being a doctor, a financial advisor, private equity, venture capital, investment banking, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been really cool and powerful. And increasingly, what I've seen is, schools are becoming almost more and more technical in the skill set they're providing to people, but the soft skills of how do you network? How do you send a blind email? When's the appropriate time to follow up? How can you be thoughtfully persistent without overdoing it? How can you ask for an introduction? How do you get a warm referral? How do you prospect? These are things that we take for granted maybe because we're in the business every day and we've learned them. But if I can kind of help accelerate people's growth by teaching them or showing them how to do that and kind of cut the learning curve, especially if they're a first generation college student,
Mm-hmm.
if they didn't grow up in an affluent household or have a network of kind of country club people or other affluent professionals to plug into because they didn't grow up in that world.
Mm-hmm.
That's been really rewarding and powerful. And so that's where I spend that's where I spend some time working with the school. And it's really fun. And the young people are so much more impressive than I was. It's kind of incredible what they're doing these days, but it's cool. It's a cool program. So
Yeah, that's encouraging. And broad? Is that broadly incorporating student athletes there, or is it focused on lacrosse?
yeah, so we have a diverse lineup of guests, and as you would
Yeah.
expect, it's a bit of a barbell. So we have a lot of like recent graduates that are really passionate alums that want to give back to the school right away, 3 to 5 years out,
Mm-hmm.
and then we've got a hard, people who are my age are working hard. They've got kids. It's kind of challenging to get them to get some time,
Mm-hmm.
but then we've got guys or people who are in their 50s and 60s that have a lot of time, almost too much time. Sometimes I got to cut them off, but and they are useful and they've got time on their hands. But no, we have a very broad cross section of socioeconomic backgrounds, undergraduate focuses, sports. It's across the board, but it's only student athlete alums. So
Okay. And the emphasis there is quick trajectory out of school.
yeah, the emphasis is the tagline is to help make sure that Wesleyan student athlete alums are successful on and off the field.
Okay.
And so the goal is to help them transition into this professional life
Yeah.
and help them understand that while they're on this professional journey, they oftentimes, especially, these are high performing athletes at a very competitive academic school and they're overachievers for the most part. They often think that it's going to be a straight rifle shot. And so helping them understand that you need to just be open to meetings, open to experiences, because that's going to lead to your next job.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the best way to do that is hearing other people's stories of, yeah, I went to this lunch that a buddy invited me to, and next thing I know, I'm started a business with this person that I sat next to, because that's how life works. You can have your plan together, but it's never going to go that way. And I think it's really powerful for people to realize that. And also, it's just a way to create more dynamic relationship building within the alumni network that is a really challenge today, given that we can't meet in person any longer.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the students are entering into a very difficult job atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes they've had their summer internships canceled or their jobs pulled back or they're on a budget constraint. And so just hoping to be a resource for them as they're trying to expand their network and land that next gig.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a super valuable time if there ever was one to really have more resources that are not academic, right? That aren't provided by the organization or school that they're at, but also aren't tied to a specific company or something like that. Kind of agnostic and can really come at from all different angles. I wish I'd been tuned into something like that coming out of school, because you're right. There's very few things in life that are linear, even though in our minds we plan something and it's linear. It's step one, step two, step three.
Yeah,
No adversity. No.
and it's hard, right? I mean, when you and I connect and I look at your LinkedIn profile, it's like, oh, well, here's the path. But when I hear you tell the story, it's, yeah, like this company blew up, or they had a budget issue, so I had to leave, or I took a risk and I went there and it didn't work, or yeah, a guy that I used to work with at this firm started a new company. He reached out to me. And increasingly, it's about trying to explain to younger people that leveraging the relationships you have and the networking and the relationship building doesn't end when you enter the workforce. It's actually just beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to reinforce that to them, that, hey, you need to make sure that you're being intentional about taking the time to keep these relationships that you built at school, but also you're continuing to just keep taking it to the next level within your firm and outside of it. That's a lesson I think sometimes very hard for people, especially financial services and professional services that are very heads down. Those industries don't want you to build your network necessarily because they want you to be beholden to your employer.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to get people to kind of realize that it's in your best interest to do these things.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think too about, like, just from my personal experience, coming from like an engineering discipline and education, things tend to be more transactional and you can figure things out, right? There's always an answer for something, or there seems like there is. But when it comes to relationships, now, where I'm at in my career, and I, maybe we get into it now, maybe we don't. My current career pivot is not even on LinkedIn yet, at the time of this recording, but it's a fantastic story, and it really plays into this. But my point is, I think I tend, coming out of school, I think I put too much emphasis on trying to maximize my time and not giving. Like, I felt like every conversation I had, if it was networking or something like that, that I had to see some immediate takeaway for me. And that's a very shallow way, in my experience, in my opinion, it's a pretty shallow way to view truly building your network for the long term.
Right. And I totally agree. And that's why when I talk to these younger folks, we focus on the term relationship building and not networking, because networking does kind of seem like a one and done type relationship, or a zero sum game where I'm asking you for something and then I don't
Mm-hmm.
reciprocate.
Mm-hmm.
A relationship building is a dual pathway
Mm-hmm.
where, I'm a guest on your show, and hopefully, I can be a resource for you moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
That's harder to teach somebody. But I think when you when you have the opportunity and you're afforded the opportunity to take a meeting or get a meeting or have a conversation, you have to understand that this is somebody that you might know for 25 or 35 or 45 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not transactional, or at least it shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's not disingenuous, even if you're a 19-year-old kid,
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the conversation, to say, well, how can I help you?
Mm-hmm.
Because even if the other person says, I don't think you can do anything right now, you never know unless you make that ask and you put it out there.
Mm-hmm.
And sending them a note 6 months later saying, hey, Susan, thanks so much for meeting me. Really appreciate it. I wanted to give you a quick update on what I'm doing here. That goes a long way
Mm-hmm.
towards building that relationship. And I think it's just best practice for life.